Let me just grab TikTok. Let me just grab TikTok. We'll call it Strong Roots in Freedom. Hello, TikTok. You are here with YouTube, and it is a beautiful day in the sunny South. There's absolutely no need for me to have this sweatshirt on, yet here I sit in my comfy, cozy gazebo. But I've been up since about 3 a.m. and I've been working on a course that I teach on the Bill of Rights. It's for elementary school and middle school level. Hey, Foster Bear. Elementary school and middle school level students, and I call it Foundations of the Bill of Rights. And whereas most children start learning history and eventually work their way up to, there were these people called the Founding Fathers that got together and they came up with this document. I actually teach it in a reverse way, in that the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution of the United States of America, is so profound, so important that we should start with it. That the first history lessons our children should learn should be rooted in that we have freedom of speech, we have freedom of religion, and the right to protest and redress our grievances against the government. That we were endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, right? And that includes the right to bear arms. That includes not having to let a soldier live in your house. That includes your right to privacy. That includes, right, even if they violate, interesting when you study the Founding Fathers and you get into like the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist, and a lot of the conversations around the founding of our country where, well, why would we put these, they don't put rights, the amendments aren't rights, why would we put these restrictions on government in the Constitution when it's just going to violate it? They're just going to violate freedom of speech, your right to privacy, and your right to a fair trial. And no doubt, I mean, those arguments, they've proven to be true. But even with that said, looking back now, putting those concepts into the Bill of Rights was one of the most profound acts in human history. And because of that, these ideas, freedom of speech, right? Like when you go to like European countries and whatnot, and they don't have the same cultural connection to freedom of speech. They don't have the same cultural connection to these inalienable rights. And part of the reason we have that in America, part of the reason we're still able to fight for those ideals, is because a long time ago, when some people were saying, oh, there's no need to put that in a document, enough of the Founding Fathers that had influence, they disagreed. And they said, no, you need to put this in the document. And it needs to say that the government shall not abridge your freedom of speech, right? Right? The government shall not restrict your freedom to practice religion. The government shall not infringe upon your right to bear arms. Hello from Chernobyl. All right. And then when we teach our children about these documents, think about everything I just said, right? The government shall not restrict, right, your ability to freely practice religion. The government shall not abridge your freedom of speech. The government shall not infringe upon your right to bear arms. The rights themselves aren't coming from the document. The document is limiting what the government can do to you, right? Even the fair trial, right? All those things. The government cannot search your person without proper warrant, right? they created this document and it put these restrictions on government. But as I teach this to children now, and I teach a course on the Bill of Rights, it needs context, because otherwise, what do these things mean? Why is freedom of speech important? What about all these hate speechers, right? Like, why is the right to bear arms important? Why is the right to privacy important? Why is the right to a fair trial important? The children need context. So what we do is we teach them the Bill of Rights, and then as we do it, we almost jump back and forth in time, say, oh, so the Founding Fathers put freedom of speech into the Constitution. Well, why was freedom of speech important to them? And then you could get into a lot of very interesting topics. Did you know the brother of Benjamin Franklin's brother owned a newspaper, and he was arrested multiple times for publishing things in his newspaper that the powers that be said he couldn't publish, right? That many of the Founding Fathers themselves published works under pseudonyms, right? John Adams published his work under a pseudonym when he was criticizing the Stamp Act. And the reason for that is because he was risking his freedom, right? He could have been arrested for speaking out against these things. So he's against the powers that be. They'll always make an excuse to silence you or to even lock you up. And we see that in the modern world where, you know, now it's not done. Now our free speech still is protected by the government, ironically. Like, you could speak freely in a government building. You could speak freely in a library. Hey, Allie, how you doing? Where you have difficulty speaking freely is the corporate realm, right? So then you have like Twitter and these social media sites, and you know, they get called in front of Congress, and Congress pressures them to restrict certain things, right? And that's how the Constitution is subverted in the modern world. And one of the things I really want to stress to the students at the end of this course is, I'm not going to get into it here. I'll get into it on my YouTube channel. I'm going to jump over to YouTube in a little bit. But even the social media companies restricting things is nonsense. It's not constitutional. It's nonsense. But I'll get into that on the other channel. But even that, I mean, within the first 10 amendments, it states outright that we have more rights outside of what is denoted in the document, right? So, you know, just because a specific right, just because a specific right might not be mentioned in the Constitution doesn't mean we don't have it. And that's explicitly stated with the 9th Amendment, right? So, anyway, I am teaching a course on the Bill of Rights. I'm really excited about it. We did Class 1 last week, and anyone who joins the community now, they have access to the replay of Class 1. And tomorrow, Class 1 was Introduction to the Bill of Rights through the American Revolution and Basic History. And Class 2 is going to be a focus on freedom of speech, something I'm so excited about. I think something that is so important. So that's what we'll be focusing on tomorrow with the course on freedom of speech. And then we're doing a lot of other we're doing cool stuff. So I already taught a course on propaganda, which I used the Cubs to Bears children book series, which I taught. And, you know, we taught children in the course how to identify manipulation. So, you know, in the Right to Bear Arms, Charisma Cat, in the Right to Bear Arms, Charisma Cat has her news roosters report of skunk attacks left and right, skunk attacks day and night. And the animals chanted in the streets, the smell of skunk violence reeks. And, you know, ultimately the skunks give up their stink, and a lot of the different animals give up, you know, the lions give up their claws, the goats their horns. And then the bears wouldn't give up their claws, and eventually we find out why that's important. And we teach children how to identify social shame, right? How to identify social shame and how it's used to get us to surrender our rights voluntarily, and then so much more. So we're doing all that. We're doing the Bill of Rights class now. We're doing a year-long nature unit study in which our students they're actually gardening. They're building their own garden boxes. They're making compost. They're making greenhouses. They're learning to identify nutrient deficiencies in soil and actually treat the nutrient deficiencies. Like this week, our students are using banana peels to make a natural fertilizer, which I'm really excited about. So we're doing all that. A lot of really positive things happening, and yeah, I think it's a really cool thing. So all right, I'm gonna jump over to YouTube, and I could talk more freely on YouTube, but www.classicallearner.com, Homeschools Connected, and it's use the promotion code FREEDOM, and it's $10 a month with the promotion code FREEDOM, all lowercase. So you can find me, Classical Learner, on basically anything, and I'm gonna give you a 10 count now, because after that, the delay should be done, and then I could go. All right. All right, so that was a quick little stream to the Cubs to Bears YouTube channel. TikTok channel. It is a beautiful day. I'm taking those off. Taking those off. Beautiful day. All right. So, yeah, it really is. It's teaching the course on the Bill of Rights, and I've been refreshing my memory on all this stuff this week. It really, I know like a lot of us, we get into the conspiracies and like the Freemasons and the Illuminati and, how they have a lot of control over what happens in society. And then, we know that a lot of the founding fathers themselves were Freemasons. And, if you just look at the layout of Washington, D.C. from an aerial drone, it's all Freemasonry and symbolism, right? The entire Washington, D.C. was designed around it. And a lot of us, we see that stuff, and I think even in the more freedom-loving crowd, we, because of the secrecy around it, we become disenchanted with our founding, with our roots. But the truth is that it's our roots that make us free. And I think the powers that be, I think there's always power struggles. And maybe at one time, Freemasonry was doing some good things, but there's always power struggles. And I think today they want to separate us from those roots. I think they want us to, the founding fathers, they were terrible. They were part of these secret groups, and because of that, we shouldn't value our freedoms. But kind of like I laid out a little bit earlier, hey, Moms Against Medical Bullying and Apartheid, I like the name. So like our freedoms, so they want us to surrender our freedoms, but like I said earlier, you could speak freely in a public library. You could speak freely on government grounds. Now, they might, entice you to do some stuff where they could get you, but it's the terms and conditions of companies like Twitter, right, or the one that I'm talking to you on now, that are really suppressing people in the public sphere. And it's important that we teach the next generation to celebrate their roots and have a connection to their roots. Like, it is no good having generations of children come up and be like, oh, well, like even the freedom-loving people that are like, teaching their children like, oh, the founding fathers were no good. No. Like that's no good. That's no good. That's a recipe. That is a recipe for being conquered. Like, no, I'm sure the people that are trying to conquer America would love nothing more than like, oh yeah, what we need is a new constitutional convention. Yeah, you sure about that? Be careful what you wish for, because we see how hard it is to get things done in this world, right? and like all of the money and the power that backs things, how much influence they have. And it is like going back through the history of this stuff, it's really reaffirmed my connection to our roots. Going back through the history of this stuff, it is remarkable what the founding fathers achieved. I remember I had, he's a good guy, but one of the guys that followed me for a long time, I made a video about Ben Franklin, and he's coming at me like I did something wrong, like he's the enemy, he's a terrible guy. You sure about that? You sure old Benny's the enemy? Yeah, haven't you seen the bodies locked in his basement? Yeah, I know. Yeah, believe me, it's concerning. Yes, it's concerning when they find, like, I don't know the exact numbers, but like 70 dead bodies in the guy's basement. Yes, that's concerning. But you sure he was your enemy? Sure about that? Because you go through the history, and the fact that they were able to put the free speech, that the government can't restrict that, to encode that in law. Oh, that's huge. They encoded in law that your right to bear arms shall not be infringed. You sure that guy's your enemy? You sure you want to disavow that? Right? These people, because they're so righteous. But yeah, it's very interesting. I was watching a documentary. Who put it together? I was so impressed. And it looks like, from the headlines of the other stuff he talks about, I'm going to binge watch him. I was impressed enough by the guy. I'm guessing he's really awake from what he spoke about and the other stuff he talked about. Empire of the Mind. Again, I only watched his one video, but I was really impressed. Empire of the Mind. Did a real great video on the American Revolution, our founding. And then I have to binge watch his stuff, but he talks a lot about like Stanley Kubrick, who like, for those of you not familiar with Kubrick, he most likely worked with NASA in part of faking the moon landing. So, I mean, if he's awake to that stuff, it's just, he's probably, he's a really interesting guy, this Empire of Mind guy. So I'm probably going to watch him, binge watch him over the next week and see what he's about. But yeah, really interesting stuff. So he was talking about the American Revolution and a lot about the Stamp Act and what I'm going to be talking about today. When Britain did the Stamp Act, and which was basically a tax on all paper goods, right? Like anything that was paper, you had to pay for a British stamp, essentially. Which at the time, and you had to do it in British currency, not American paper money, which was a big deal. And at the time, that was very restrictive in terms of it limited people's free speech, because if you started taxing all paper, right, like today that social media is how we communicate, but back then people communicated through the written word, and like they were restricting the written word and obviously greatly affecting commerce, right? They're affecting the businesses of the colonists because, well, business requires a lot of paperwork, right? So they're like, oh, every piece of paper you file, like it needs to have our stamp. Well, the colonists got together and they were against that, and they were going to protest that. And Ben Franklin, actually, he went to Britain, and he spoke in front of Parliament, the House of Commons. And he told them, he said, listen, we're trying to work with you, but if you don't get rid of this tax on the stamps, then the colonists, we're going to boycott everything coming from Britain. And they were like, oh, well, how can you do that? And Franklin explained to them, and he said, listen, we are a very self-reliant people on the other side of the world. And what he meant by that is it was an agricultural economy. And because of that, because the American colonists were homesteaders, right? They were farmers. They knew how to do things. They knew how to build with their hands. They built their houses with blood, sweat, and tears. They grew their own food, right? They were locksmiths, right? Metalsmiths, welders, right? These were people that were capable of living independently on their own. They owned small businesses. They did apprenticeships. They hired each other, right? Think about all the things I talk about all the time. And then that's what that's what Ben Franklin pointed out. And that's what Empire of Mind was pointing out in this documentary. So they went to Britain, Ben Franklin did, and said, listen, we're going to boycott your stuff. And Britain realized, they were like, oh man, they could really do this. And because, yes, they didn't comply, but the reason the colonists were able to have the Stamp Act repealed, right, because it was repealed, the Parliament they were like, all right, is because they would not rely. When you have a country of self-reliant people, when you have a country of people that do their best to stay out of debt, that are married, or husbands, or fathers, that own their own businesses, that take on apprenticeships, right, that work with each other, that grow their own food, that farm, that take care of their own animals, you have a people that are very difficult to control. Well, why didn't the protesting work, as minimal as it was, in the last 2 years in the United States of America and throughout the world? Because today, people are so reliant on the system. People don't grow their own food. I mean, people are completely reliant on the grocery stores. They're completely reliant on big corporate supply chains, right? People don't have their own supply chains. They can't get their eggs from their neighbor down the block. They can't get their milk from their neighbor up the block. They don't know their local farmer where they could buy food from him directly. They don't have friends that could hire them to do jobs, or they can get jobs themselves. And because of that, they're very easy to control. Well, if we're going to be a free people, if we're going to raise our children to be free, then we have to teach them their rights, and we have to make sure they understand the history and why the colonists were able to be free, why they were able to successfully boycott. Because they were self-reliant people. Because it wasn't about do not comply. It's part of it. Because they didn't rely. People are so disconnected from the basic life necessities. Exactly. Yes, they don't want us to look back in history and agree with the... Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. You get it. So they are trying to disconnect us from our history and disconnect us from the basics, the necessities of life. I think I like how you worded that, because people aren't able to meet their bare necessities, and because of that, well, you can't meet the bare necessities, then you're reliant on the big corporations, and that's where we have to get our children to a place where they're not reliant, and then we'll be in a better place. So, all right, I think I'm going to call it a stream on that. I just wanted to do a quick one today. I've been getting ready for the class tomorrow, so I've been doing a lot. I've been up since 3. I think Nicole needs me to watch the kids for a few hours, what she wants to do. So Foster Bear, thank you. So I think I'll call it on that, and we got a big day tomorrow, so class number 2 in the Bill of Rights, and I'm really enjoying this. I've really enjoyed looking back into this stuff again and refreshing my memory on all this stuff, and it really has connected me to our roots. Like, for the last few years, you get into the gravy with like all the Illuminati and the Masonry, but like, no, I'm sorry. Don't let them fool you. Don't let people make you cynical. What was accomplished around 1776, and really around 1788 to 1791 with the Bill of Rights specifically, is very, very important. And I'm not an expert on the Articles of Confederation, and I plan on learning more about the Articles of Confederation, because I know there's some grabble around the Constitution itself, in that there was banking interest involved, and America owed money to France after the war. And I think England might have stepped in and tried to help pay that. It's a whole thing. But either way, the Bill of Rights itself is one of the most remarkable documents in human history. So I'm going to teach more of that, and we're going to have fun with it. So, all right, freedom isn't free. We have to earn it every day, and I will undoubtedly be back tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Eastern to earn it.